Wolf policy and the natural resource policy. We have a number of different people here today, tonight, and some political types. So I'm actually going to start with something a little bit different, and I hope that's okay with you. Most of you don't know, I'm actually on the tribal rolls of the. Can you hear me? I'm on the tribal rolls of the Caddo tribe out of Oklahoma. Believe it or not, my mom's Native American. I just don't look. They're kind of a small, round-faced, not very dark people. So I don't look Native American, but I am. So I've been interested in that culture forever. My parents raised me with that interest. Just tell you a really quick story. So after the Mexican-American War, when the Navajo Nation was sort of struggling, and when there was more population growth into that area, and Anglo-European type people moving into that area of New Mexico and the Four Corners, Arizona area, there began to be some friction. And so there was some problem. And this isn't a discussion about white people and Indian people or anything like that. But there was some friction there. The cultures were different. And frankly, the settlers didn't like some stuff that the Native American people did and vice versa. One of the things that the Native American people did as a practice, it wasn't war, but they just raided other villages. They just kind of took stuff. And that didn't go so well. So there was an inevitable conflict coming. It was inevitable. But what was interesting isn't that there was a conflict, it was what the government did about that. So what they did is, at the time, Navajos raised sheep, and down in the lower areas they grew corn. They weren't nomadic, there were just different areas to do those things. They would go up and raise sheep and come down and grow corn, up and raise sheep and come down and grow corn. There's no other description of what they did other than free market capitalism. There isn't any other description. That's what they did, except for the stealing part. But for the most part, that's what they did. And so they were self-sufficient. They knew what they were doing. They lived in the desert, and if you've ever spent a lot of time down there, it's a really, you couldn't believe people could build a culture down there, but they did. How the government handled this is they decided, look, these guys can't go on living this way. And so they systematically went and slaughtered their flocks of sheep and burnt their fields of corn. Because they knew that if they couldn't make a living there anymore, eventually they'd just starve them out. They tried to fight them, they couldn't fight them. They used their, the Navajo would use their knowledge of the area and everything else, and they just couldn't fight them. But they knew they could starve them out, so that's what they did. So eventually the Navajos show up at a Canyon de Shelly area, they show up at a fort, and they start surrendering. And what happened was the government decided, there was one particular general, and he decided, hey, we need to march these guys about 350 miles down in New Mexico to the Fort Sumner area, where Fort Sumner is, and it's Basque Redondo was the name of this area. Because the general saw this little crescent green area, and he thought, that is a beautiful place. That's where those Indians need to live. Look at this place. It was green, and there's a river there. What he didn't know is that the river was alkaline, and nothing could grow there except for the particular type of green sort of salt cedar type of thing that grew there. Nothing else would grow there except that. But that's where they put them. And so they took these formerly self-sufficient Navajo, and they put them in rows, in barracks, and said, hey, we'll provide you a place to live. Well, Navajo live in circles, and their houses are circles. You've seen a hogan, their houses are circles, their communities are circles. And they didn't like to live like that. So they would live out next to the barracks. And the generals and the military thought they were nuts, but frankly they didn't like to live like that. We built you this nice place, well, why won't you live there? Well, at the end of the first year, they had a crop. They had a little bit of a yield. They thought, well, it'll take them a couple of years. Into the second year, their crop got bugs, and most of it died. Into the third year, they were starving to death. By the fifth year, half of that population was dead. Half the population was dead. And they begged, please let us go back home and take care of ourselves. We'll do anything. We'll do anything. Just let us walk this 350 miles back home. Before they did that, the military, it was a reservation, they would do everything. They said, well, gosh, they're starving to death. So the military actually had to ship food to this formerly self-sufficient people. and they shipped food to them. Of course, it was full of weevils and all kinds of other things, and so they were low on food. So they printed up food tickets, but the Navajo were craftsmen, so they counterfeited them. So then they printed food coins, but the Navajo counterfeited those as well. You know, they didn't have anything else to do except for mess with the military people, right? They didn't have anything else to do. Finally, after these 5 years, the military relented because they couldn't afford, this is the reason why, they couldn't afford to feed them anymore. So that's why they allowed them to walk back. And the day before they left, their teenage boys were scouts and were running miles and miles and miles up the trail just to check out the trail, just so they could walk back the next day, so they could go. They wanted to leave and go home. The reason I tell you that story is because that is what's happening to us. They have decided that there's a better way to live. They've decided that we don't know well enough how to do this, that we're going to ruin our land, that we're going to ruin our area. We were a self-sufficient people, and they've decided that we don't know how to do that, that we can't be allowed to. Maybe there were some problems, I don't know, maybe, the environmentalists saw a clear cut, whatever happened. And they decided that these people couldn't possibly be left alone to run this area, we've got to do it for them. The thing is, if gone long enough, they will starve us out of this area. In our economic planning right now, what we found is that the single biggest source of income is the federal government here in Ravalli County. So they call them transfer payments. So some of those are things like food stamps. A lot of them are retirement, federal retirement. So retired federal employees, nothing wrong with that, they earn their retirement. But the single biggest source of income is federal transfer payments. No area can survive that way. It simply can't be done. Now, I don't want to come to a political thing and try to get you riled up, because anybody can do that. So the question is, so what? And I guess we've got some of our state guys here tonight, so I'm trying to influence them a little bit. I'm trying to say that we've really got to understand where we're at here. We're done. We're out of time. We don't have a lot of other avenues, and a lot of other ways to go other than our natural resources, and we're buried in them, but we can't use them. So what do we do about it? The wolf policy, we're just about done with it, and here's a problem in government, and I'm learning this as we go along, and I apologize for being an amateur. And now I'm an amateur with a year behind me. But one of the things is we don't want to make decisions for other people. We truly want a public process, and we truly want to bring everybody in and say, how do we do this, and what really do we want as a community? The problem is, at some level, you have to stop talking and do it, okay? And so that's where we are with the wolf policy. We've talked and talked and talked, and we found some things that we agree on 95%. And we can bat around the last 5% for the next 20 years if we want to. I think nobody wants to do that. What we have left is to sign off on a couple of little items on our wolf policy. We should be done with it in a week. We're then going to go to the FWP and ask them to look at our wolf policy. Wolf policy has two portions. One is a number of questions we're going to ask FWP. You're saying, wait a minute, your policy is to ask FWP questions? Well, yes. Anybody can stand up in a public forum and question period and say, hey, I wonder about this, and they can ignore it. And that's what they do. So we've prepared a number of questions that as a county with suffering natural resources, as a county with a suffering economic base, as a county that's been injured by this introduction of wolves, this reintroduction of wolves, whatever you want to call it, we've been injured by this government action. We would like you to answer these questions. And they're not ridiculous questions like, who do you think you are? They're questions like, what is the maximum number of wolves you allow in our area? What are your criteria to define those? What's the minimum number of wolves? Well, okay, enough to maintain a genetically connected population. Fine, so north of a genetically connected population, the state doesn't have any criteria for that top number. And we're asking them to develop that. And if they won't answer that really focuses the question. So some of this is political, some of it's positioning. But it really is aimed at getting the FWP to tell us what their goals are. I talked to it was not a horribly fruitful conversation, and Scott helped me. We were talking to an environmental pro-wolf guy, and I asked him, well, what is the point? what is the point of this program? And his answer was dispersal. So dispersal is when wolves have enough pups and they can't all eat off the same elk, and so they go somewhere else and eat other elk there. Well, if the point is dispersal, is there any place that wouldn't have wolves? Well, the answer is no. So is that FWP's goal for dispersal and the expansion of wolf population, not only the expansion of it, but to a high degree, the number of wolves. So there's the question part of it. And we've got several things. And then there's the things we want them to consider. And we have to start somewhere. When I go back to my Navajo story, did you notice that when the Navajos worked the things that they knew best, they could defend themselves, okay? What they didn't do is line up and go out to battle, 1,000 people wide. They did these sort of guerrilla tactics, right? And so when we talk about, in government, when we talk about incrementalism, when we talk about saying, look, we want to get to a goal, and we can't get to, on a scale of 1 to 10, we can't get to 10 today, but we can get to 2. A lot of times the conversation we have is, wait a minute, 2 is not enough. Well, no, it isn't enough, but it's better than nothing, and it's on the way to 10. Okay? The left has beat us to death with that. And we probably ought to learn how to do it a little bit ourselves. And so when we talk about this, a lot of times people, politicians will stand up, and I know it's frustrating, and you say, wait a minute, what you're proposing isn't anywhere near enough. No, it's not, but it's what we can get today. And then we'll have a new conversation tomorrow, and we'll see what we can get tomorrow. And so the things we've proposed in the wolf policy aren't the answer. They're not going to fix our problem tomorrow. They do make some ground to fixing that problem. They do put us in a position to further define the problem. If we up the quota, if we enhance the hunt, if we do all these things, and you know what, it still doesn't matter, we've reshaped reframed that argument, haven't we? We've put them in a place where they say, it doesn't matter what their official number of wolves are. They are causing such damage and have caused such damage, and we removed 25 of them or 35 of them or 45 of them, and gosh, if it still hasn't helped, that changes the conversation. But if we don't do anything at all, and we say, well, we've lost, then nothing happens, and we stay right where we are. Furthermore, it harms the county next to us and the county next to them. You know how dispersal works, right? So we've got to, what we're doing here in this county will help 3 counties over. The one next to us is probably already in too much trouble as well. But it'll help the one next to them. They have wolves. They don't have the number of wolves we have right now in Cascade County, for example. But they will if we don't do something here. And so it isn't just for us. So that's the wolf policy. Where I apologize for sort of